Well, if you're like me, you're probably suffering from a bit of political fatigue right now. The result of the Australian election a couple of weekends ago didn't give us much hope for optimism, although I did publish on the night a piece explaining why this is an excellent moment or opportunity for renewal for conservatism in Australia. That piece went absolutely viral, and I stand by it. This is actually a rare moment in Australian politics, and we should take advantage of it. But still, I was still feeling a little bit fatigued by it all, and last weekend I was struck down by something called ronavirus, which makes coronavirus seem like a mild cough. Well, in fact, I think coronavirus is only a mild cough, but more on that on another day. Anyway, I took advantage of my convalescence to get into this, a book I've been reading to read for some time. I thought it was a long way from politics. Turns out it's not. It's this book, Chaos, the true story behind the Manson murders. It's 6 years old, but the book deservedly continues to generate debate and sales, even now. It was adapted this year by Netflix and was also featured on Candace Owens' book club. It reveals the shady government agents from a variety of departments, the judiciary and law enforcement, who were working in the background of the gang of hippies who gruesomely killed pregnant actress Sharon Tate and between 8 and 23 other randomly targeted people in and around Los Angeles in August 1969. But that isn't the most alarming thing about this story. Books like this are meant to placate us. You know, once these stories are exposed, the evil forces behind them are meant to go away. But that's not the case. The alarming thing to us today, more than 50 years later, is that these pernicious forces behind this particular horrific crime never really went away. In fact, they've become worse. One of the nagging impressions I got from Chaos was that it felt almost nostalgic for a simpler, more innocent time, when the enemies of civilization could be easily identified by their smell if they were genuine hippies, or their fake tie-dyed t-shirts if they were undercover agents. The West remains in the grip of 1960s counterculture, which, for all its great music, also destroyed the family through free love, destroyed our prosperity through its obsession to save the environment, and, worst of all, replaced our once glorious civilization with the vague notion of multiculturalism, a concept so deluded that it could only have been devised under the influence of acid. The enemies of our civilization today might not get their kicks by getting high and sneaking into your house at night armed with knives and guns, but that doesn't mean they don't want to ruin or at least sadistically control your life. Chaos, the book, is the gripping story of how two seemingly opposing forces momentarily developed a synergy. The story of how this unfolded to the author is itself extraordinary. American journalist Tom O'Neill was commissioned by Premiere magazine in 1999 to write a story to coincide with the 30th anniversary of the Tate murders by the followers of violent ex-convict and pseudo-hippie guru Charles Manson in 1969. Despite there having been dozens of books already published on the subject, O'Neill soon discovered that the most popular interpretation of the crime, based on the book Helter Skelter, which was written by the trial's chief prosecutor, had deeply suspicious loose ends and omissions. He became so immersed in the story that he missed the deadline. He was still working on it by the time the 40th anniversary rolled past. By then, Premiere magazine no longer even existed. When O'Neill finally published his story in 2019, it was a 436-page book. He was on his second publisher, had at one stage been $500,000 in debt, interviewed hundreds of people, including Manson himself, spent thousands of hours sifting through dusty police archives, digging up false testimonies and unsolved crimes, broadened his purview to secret operations in Vietnam and, you guessed it, the JFK assassination, and still somehow managed to maintain his sanity. And I've got to say, that's one of the charms of the book. And maintaining his sanity throughout all this is no small feat. I know a journalist who was seriously disturbed after spending only a year investigating a famous crime book in Australia. Anyway, O'Neill wasn't to know it, but his book was released on the eve of the coronavirus hoax, which was to distract the world's attention somewhat, especially those who would be his initial primary market, who are people who are interested in conspiracy theories. Perhaps that was a good thing. It's enjoyed a slow burn in the 6 years since then. Other conspiracy theories about things like chemtrails, banking, vaccines, high-level pedophile gangs, and so on, have since become so elaborate and often so persuasive that chaos now looks positively mainstream by comparison. I should point out that chaos reaches no concrete conclusions either, but it does dig up evidence that makes government involvement with the Manson gang irrefutable. The motives for this take two main forms. First, that the FBI and the CIA were both obsessively trying to shut down 1960s counterculture, which they saw as incubating communism on home soil, which, to quote O'Neill, was an aim that, coincidentally or not, described exactly the effect of the Manson murders. In other words, allow the Manson family to have their helter-skelter and watch the front page news destroy the myth of peace-loving hippies overnight. The other is that the Manson family were lab rats for MK Ultra, the bizarre, top-secret CIA unit that investigated, you're not going to believe this, investigated chemical forms of mind control from 1953 to 1973. Its objective was to create, among other things, hypnotised assassins who could be deployed against high-level enemies of the United States in espionage or war. The CIA, in a rare moment of clarity, if not conscience, destroyed most of MK Ultra's records in 1972. But through sheer persistence and blind faith, O'Neill unbelievably uncovers a cache of correspondence between MK Ultra employee Lewis Jolly West and his boss, Sidney Gottlieb, in which West describes his desire to find ways to chemically extract memories from people, willingly or not, implant false memories in them, and, quote, induce in them specific mental disorders. He was also interested in, quote, the induction of trance states by drugs. And here's the key quote, which O'Neill puts in the book. Needless to say, these experiments must eventually be put to test in practical trials in the field, West told his boss. And a decade later, West moved to San Francisco and began working undercover as a researcher at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Center, a government-funded hippie hangout masquerading as a health clinic, often treating sexual transmitted diseases, around the corner from an apartment where Manson and his fledgling family, which were essentially a harem of underage runaways, were living, and where Manson himself spent a lot of time. Conspicuous, don't you think? There are myriad other less sensational but equally troubling cover-ups and outright lies revealed throughout the book, which O'Neill pursues doggedly and with admirable impartiality, even when the people he interviews are evasive, hostile, or even threaten massive lawsuits. One of the main things that struck me about this book is that it could never have been written in Australia. To win a defamation lawsuit in the United States, a public figure must prove a defamatory allegation was malicious. O'Neill doesn't seem to have a malicious bone in his body, so his book was always going to be reasonably safe. Besides, most of the people who are defamed didn't live long enough to see the book published anyway. It took that long to write. In Australia, though, the essential defence in a defamation case is truth. So unless you have rock-solid evidence of an allegation, it's usually not worth publishing. Journalists instinctively shy away from even looking at stories where the truth is ambiguous or unknowable. Our democracy is infinitely poorer for it. In some ways, O'Neill's claim that the Mansons' murders were a jarring, tragic coda to the 1960s is correct. People like Candice Bergen, the Beach Boys' Dennis Wilson, and Mama Cass, who all helped to define some of the brighter moments of the 1960s, also wound up playing essential parts in this sordid Los Angeles-based tragedy. But, as history records, Woodstock, 3 days of peace and music, was held on the other side of the United States only a week after the Tate murders. The CIA has been implicated in that too, as if it was a cover for an experiment in mass drug use, but that theory seems unlikely. Woodstock instead undid the damage Manson did to 1960s idealism. You can see me coming back towards politics now. The Woodstock legacy is the anti-conservative, anti-industrial ideology that is now embedded in the Western psyche. As I said above, this has manifested in free love destroying the family, environmentalism destroying our prosperity, and multiculturalism destroying our civilization. Perhaps most bizarrely, it has also led to Chris Bowen, one of the least hip politicians in the entire world, being appointed to manage a project not even John Lennon would dare to imagine, shutting down our coal and gas-fired power stations and replacing them with groovy renewable solar panels and windmills. Stoned hippies might perceive all these outcomes as positive. But hey, they're stoned. As far as I know, Bowen and the rest of the progressive cult in politics don't have that excuse. It's difficult to imagine they are unaware of the destruction they are wreaking because the evidence is all around us. Broken families, ethnic ghettos, social fragmentation, rising violence, homegrown terrorism, illiteracy, homelessness, cultural ennui, censorship, low trust. The list goes on. Whether they know it or not, their 1960s style idealism is making Helter Skelter look like a church picnic. Like I said, the 1960s were a more innocent time.